All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get kicked off. Tonight we have our final part in the Fundamentals webinar series. So it'll be by Peter Ronalds talking about regenerative futures and smarter farm planning. I'm Jack, the project officer here at StockSense. So StockSense is a project run by the Victorian Farmers Federation. We're funded by the Cattle Compensation Fund and the Sheep and Goat Compensation Fund, and we're proudly delivered by the VFF Livestock Group. StockSense was established to help Victorian livestock producers maintain and improve animal health, welfare, as well as Victoria's overall biosecurity status. So we do this through numerous ways. We have educational workshops. We have them around the state of Victoria. So they're like fencing, animal husbandry, stuff like that. We do webinars like this one, the last part in our Fundamental series. We develop fact sheets, which are on our website, and we distribution of related industry material through social media and newsletters, which are quarterly. So we have a few upcoming events. So on the 25th of February, we have a Humane Euthanasia of Livestock workshop. That's in Le Pen, and it's a collaboration with Dairy Australia. And on the 20th of March, we have a fencing and biosecurity workshop in Dalesford. So if you're interested in any of them, just head to our website. So tonight, as I said, we have Peter Ronalds. So it's going to be covering practical farm planning and regenerative farming principles, including soil and pasture management, tree planting, and property planning. Guidance will be provided on prioritizing infrastructure, making informed livestock and breeding decisions, and assessing local support networks. So we have a few ways you can stay in touch with us. So we have an Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our email is up there, so if you have any questions, you can send it through. And that's our website. I think I went over one. Yeah, and we got the housekeeping, so it'll be about an hour presentation, and we'll have a 30-minute Q&A at the end. So as we go along, if you have any questions, just type them in, but we'll get to them at the end. So yeah, we're definitely keen for questions, so send them through. I won't read out the names of anyone that sends them in, so they'll be anonymous. At the end of we'll have, after the webinar finishes, we'll send out the slides with an email, and along with the recording, it will be on YouTube. So subscribe to that and you can see all the previous webinars. So I'll hand over to you, Peter, and yeah, we can get started.
Okay, how's it going? Have I got a full screen there?
Yep, looks good.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks,
No
Dominic.
worries.
And yeah, it's great to be here. I'd like to thank the VFF StockSense team for the opportunity to present this evening. Tonight, we're going to wrap up the series with a talk about smarter farm planning. My name is Peter Ronalds, and my business is Inspired Ag Solutions. Before we start, I'd just like to recognise that it's been a pretty tough week or two, or three actually, or four, with fires in a lot of the states. So yeah, if there's anyone impacted by the fires in northern Victoria or western Victoria or the Mallee or even East Gippsland, yeah, feeling for you. It's a tough time, and yeah, I hope you're doing okay. When I listen to a presenter, I like it when they tell us a little bit about themselves, as we all have different skills and knowledge and passions to share with each other and to learn from. So I live at Jindavick in West Gippsland. I was a dairy farmer for 20 years, started off as a farm apprentice. Then I share farmed and built up my own herd within a family partnership. In 2005, I did extra study in sustainable agriculture and natural resources, and I left the farm and landed a job with a land care network. My role was to engage farmers with a particular focus on sustainable agriculture. So I set up fertiliser trials, did heaps of unique and innovative demonstrations on farms, established a number of farmer discussion groups, which are still running. Some of them have been running 15 years now. Ran farm planning courses, training programs, and exposed farmers to new ideas and concepts. So I worked in land care full time for 13 years. But as a not-for-profit, it's very dependent on government funding. And in 2018, there wasn't enough funding for a full-time position, and I was getting quite a bit of outside work outside my land care role. So I set up my business in 2018 and do a lot of consulting for large and small farmers. Also take lots of soil samples. I'm pretty experienced soil carbon sampler as well, taken thousands of samples, 7 or 8,000 actually, on hundreds of farms right around Victoria. And I love helping farmers. I once was a farmer, and I guess that's still in the blood. So tonight we're going to cover 4 main themes: sustainable farming practices and property improvement planning, and some key principles to help you on that journey. And these include soil conservation, regenerative agriculture principles, freeze on farms, erosion and ground cover management. We will touch briefly on prioritising improvements and discuss must-dos versus cool-to-haves. And we'll determine what sort of enterprise suits your current needs and where to find support to help you on your journey. So I'll break down the sustainable farming practices into 4 brief topics this evening. And we can only summarise each of them really, as each of them are a session in its own right. Regenerative agriculture and the key principles, looking after our soil with soil conservation and erosion management, and tree plantings for shelter, biodiversity and agroforestry. So what is regenerative? Regenerative is defined in the dictionary as regenerating or as building, but I think it's far deeper than just what sustaining is or what we currently have. Over the past few years, I've trained well over 100 farmers in regenerative agriculture training programs that I helped develop along with some other people. There's a lot of interest in regenerative agriculture, with a lot of claims being made and quite some vested interest also. There's a set of generally accepted principles around regen ag. However, the practices are not defined and will vary depending on where your farm is situated, your enterprise type, even the season, so that we need to keep aware of that. As I said earlier, we're all on a journey, and everyone's journey is a little bit different. Your farm and family is a bit different to mine, and how we apply the principles of regen ag, if you're interested in it, will vary. However, most, I would say, of these principles are basically best practice farm management. There aren't a set of defined standards that need to be met to claim regenerative status, but perhaps we'll just run through the 6 principles highlighted in the graphic here. So the first one is, or the top one, not necessarily in order, is minimise soil disturbance. Every time we cultivate our soil, we disturb the soil microbiology, we release tightly held nitrogen and tightly held carbon, and we also put our soil at risk of wind and water erosion. So we want to minimise our soil disturbance as much as possible. Maximising crop or pasture diversity. There's a lot of really good research around which states that diverse pastures are better at building soil carbon. They're also better for animal health. You can extend your growing season potentially because you've got different plants growing at different times. So there's many pluses in actually maximising your crop and pasture diversity. Just think of it, if we were eating Weet-Bix for breakfast and for lunch and for tea, it would get a bit boring and we wouldn't perform as well as we could. That's why we have Weet-Bix with milk, for example, and we have a bit of fruit as well, and then we have vegetables and we have meats and other things. You know, the more diversity we have, the more resilient we become. Keeping soil covered is really, really important. So that becomes challenging at different times, particularly if you've had a fire go through or in drought. But if we can keep our soil covered, there's significant benefits to our soil biology and the recovery once the rains do come. Having living roots year round is another benefit as well. Every time we've got a plant that's actively growing, it's taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it's converting it into sugars, carbohydrates, which go into the root system and into the soil, which feeds the biology. So we want to really keep our soils active. Living roots year round will certainly help us with that. The integration of livestock is another critical one. Livestock are brilliant at converting pasture into nutrients. They play an integral role in the landscape, and particularly in nutrient cycling. And we've got the added benefits of the food and fibre that they produce also. Integration of trees sometimes is not included in the principles, but I think it should be. I think it's really important. Trees provide multi-benefits to us, and we'll cover them a little bit more in depth shortly. As I said, regenerative agriculture is a hot topic, and I hear many new farmers claim to be regenerative. However, a lot make the claim without being able to back it up. And I visited hundreds and hundreds of farms right throughout Victoria and in other states. And I would say that most farmers are actually doing a really excellent job. However, I think we need to consider whether farming under a particular label is actually the best decision to make. Does it limit us? There's a recent article in the ABC on the news, actually, which I found really interesting. And I think we can learn a lot from what Ian Baird says about no rules farming. So Ian says, and I quote, "By labelling your farm, you put yourself into a box, and really it is closing the toolbox," he says. "If I need them, I will use chemicals, ploughs, or choose to till. I need whatever tool that can make me sustainable and profitable." So that's something to think about, isn't it? As I said, most farmers are doing an excellent job. And I've done quite a lot of research on farmers' goals. Whenever I run a farm planning course, I give farmers a list of their goals, and there's about 25 on the list. And in every group I do, there's basically three things that stand out. Number one is most farmers, or the majority of farmers, actually their aim is to grow or produce good crops, pasture, and livestock. Number two, to leave the farm in good or better condition. And number three, to generate a satisfactory income. As I've done these surveys with all the farmers who are participating in programs I run, these are the topics that always come out. And it's also done by other consultants around Australia, and they tend to be all exactly the same. And there's many ways to reach these goals. And Ian Moss has a wonderful quote, and he says, "I think people miss great learning opportunities from other industries or other certifications because we turn off when we see something that is labelled." So I encourage you to have an open mind and be willing to learn something from everyone, no matter how they farm. We can learn a lot if we can label conventional from organic farmers in the way that they can manage pests and diseases naturally in their crops. Organic farmers can learn from conventional farmers around grazing management, for example, or how they can actually improve their crops and in a way that they could potentially follow. So we can learn from each other, and I think we need to keep our eyes and ears and mind quite open to what we can learn from others. And don't let labels hinder us. We can spend a lot of time on soil management. So I only have time to tell you a couple of nuggets that hopefully you can remember and take home with you. So in a typical soil, the minerals, water and air spaces make up about 95% of the soil. And think of them, the minerals, water and air, as perhaps like the mainframe of a computer. Then the organic matter makes up about 5% of the soil. Think of that, think of the organic matter as the computer chip that actually makes the whole computer function. It's the most important contributor to it. I've seen farmers doing amazing things with only 10 centimetres of topsoil right round the country. Really look after that top 10 centimetres. If that's all you've got, you can do really good things with it. Treasure your organic matter. Keep it healthy and build it up. Your organic matter holds your humus. The humus is the main source of all your available nutrients, and they can be tightly held. And yeah, they're there for you. A lot of our nitrogen and sulfur is tied up in the humus, phosphorus too. The roots are comprised of that, or comprised within the organic matter, along with all the organisms, the biology, and all the life within the soil. So most of the emphasis is on what is running or growing above the ground when we're farmers. We hear a lot about stocking rates, the number of cows per hectare, the amount of pasture or crop grown per hectare, DSE or dry sheep equivalent per hectare. There's a whole lot of benchmarks that people use, but we need to remember that the biology is driving the whole system. Biology is driven by four things: temperature, moisture, oxygen, and a food source. So I'll repeat them: temperature, moisture, oxygen, and a food source. So the biology makes the nutrients available for the plant. In a healthy soil, you will have more life underground than above the ground. And I've got an example here, and it was created by Fiona Baker at AgVic, and it's a really good example, I think, because if we're running 1.5 cows per hectare and the cow weighs 500 kilograms, that's 750 kilograms per hectare we're running above ground. However, if we've got a healthy soil, and if we've got 70 worms per metre squared, which is not a lot really, you'll have 700,000 worms per hectare. And each worm, the scientists have worked out, average a bit over 3 grams. So you actually have about 2.4 tonnes of worms under the soil. So we need to be looking after them. The biology makes the nutrients available for the plant. So in summer, when the soil conditions are dry, for example, like it is now, there will not be enough moisture to drive high levels of biology. The earthworms will be way down, or they'll be disappeared. There'll be not enough moisture to really get your pastures growing. And then in the winter, when conditions are cold, the temperature won't be high enough for optimum biology. So that's why the pasture doesn't grow quite as well in the winter, because there's not the nutrients, there's not the cycling that's happening. You haven't got the temperature. If your soil is dead and lifeless, there won't be enough food for the biology to thrive. And if the soil is compacted, for example, there won't be enough oxygen for the biology to breathe. And soil actually does need to breathe. The biology needs to breathe. They respirate, a lot of them. The picture on the left was taken at Araya Park, which is just north of Wagga Wagga. It's a massive dust storm. It's not smoke, it's actually dust. And the dust is actually comprised of the finest soil particles, and they hold the majority of your soil nutrients. A lot of your humus is actually comprised in that dust that is actually blowing off your farm. When the ground is not covered, there's a real risk of wind erosion blowing the soil and the humus and nutrients off your farm. Or alternatively, if you get a heavy rainstorm, The rain could be potentially washing the nutrients off your farm if you haven't got ground cover. The picture on the right was taken at Gendvik, where I live, after Black Saturday. When a fire burns the pasture, the soil is left exposed and it's really, really vulnerable to water and wind erosion. And often after a fire, one of the things you often tend to get is a big rainstorm at some time. It might be 2, 3, 4 months later. And a lot of topsoil can get washed away after a fire. And we need to be aware of that. Obviously, we can't stop fires coming sometimes, but when they come, we need to do all we can to protect our soils. So one of the most important things is to keep your soil covered. It's one of the key regenerative ag principles, as we mentioned earlier. So this is an amazing demonstration. That's just an easy one to set up, showing what happens when it rains and the soil has different characteristics. For example, in the barrel on the right-hand side, we've got a bare soil that has been cultivated, and then just above it, there's a tap. We can't actually see the tap. They each got the same amount of water released onto the soil from the taps. And what's happened is that on that bare, exposed, cultivated soil, the tap water has actually made a hole in the soil. So it's actually eroded the soil. A lot of those fines will be at the bottom of that barrel. And then you can see when the soil gets filled, it overflows into the little upside down lemonade bottle. And you can see that the soil is really dirty coloured, it's brown. So that is your soil, and it's the finer particles of your soil which generally hold your nutrients, which have been lost. And that's what happens when your soil is uncovered and exposed to high rainfall. The middle barrel is the same soil as on the right-hand side, except that it has mulch over the top of it. That's the only difference. It's not living, it's just mulch and residue. There's a few leaves there. Looks like there's a little bit of squash pasture and hay on there as well. Same thing, water was poured onto that, into that barrel, but we didn't get the erosion. The water actually was dispersed by the residue on top of the soil, and you can see that the actual water coming out into that reverse lemonade bottle is actually not too bad. Then on the left-hand side, we've got living pasture. We've got pasture growing there. Same amount of rain or tap water was actually put on. There's absolutely no soil loss. We can see that the water in the lemonade bottle is actually clean. So that's a really stark reminder of how important it is to keep our soil covered. Obviously, can't have green grass 12 months of the year unless you're on irrigation. But, make sure that we don't have bare soil when things get tough, in the summer particularly. Try to keep a little bit of coverage there. Let the grass grow a bit longer so that the animals actually trample a bit down to create a bit of coverage, perhaps in late spring or early summer. There's another graphic experiment here. It was conducted in South Africa and highlights, again, the importance of minimising soil disturbance. So the experiment was conducted on a 4% slope, so pretty flat, and simulated a heavy storm with 63 mils of rain, so 2.5 inches in 30 minutes. So pretty heavy rain for Victoria, more typical of Northern Australia. However, the principles are exactly the same. They have soil, we have rain, we can have bare soil, we can have covered soil. What they found was that when the soil had been inverted and ploughed with no ground cover, such as prior to sowing and after ploughing, 90% of the water ran off, so only 10% infiltrated, but the 90% of the water that ran off actually took 28.6 tonnes of topsoil with it. However, when the soil hadn't been ploughed and there was coverage on top of the soil, 94% of the water infiltrated into the soil, only 6% ran off, and that's a heavy storm, 63 mils in 30 minutes. and there was only a loss of 1 tonne of topsoil. So again, that just reinforces the importance of keeping soil covered and hopefully having something actively growing within your soil. Um, so there's a few numbers there, but the principles are there. Keep your soil covered. The lowest hanging fruit on most of the farms that I visit, or most of the grazing farms, is in grazing or pasture management. I usually spend a full day training farmers on different grazing management techniques, but there's one really, really simple rule, and that's rotate and then rest it. Now, how long you rest the pasture for will depend on how quick the pasture recovers. It's not time bound. It's not like 21 days or 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 180 days. You should be basing your grazing on when the pasture is ready to go back in to get the best out of the pasture and the livestock. And that way, you'll really stimulate and encourage ground cover all the time. Don't graze the pasture before it's grown back. It will actually impede or limit the potential productivity of the pasture. There's a little table there, and it might be a little bit hard to see, read it. There's a little experiment that's done in America. And what it basically says that if farmers graze down to 50% of what was there, so if there was 3,000 kilograms of dry matter and they grazed 50% of it, so left 1,500, the roots do not stop growing with only 50% of the plant removed, 50% of the plant remaining. However, if you graze down and take 70%, 50% of the roots stop growing for 17 days. This is what the research found. And then if you graze right to the floorboards, for example, with 90% of the plant removed, 100% of the roots stop growing for 17 days. They actually shear off. The plant sort of expels the roots, and they're not attached to the plant any further. So it's like you get the scissors and cut them off. So just be aware when you're grazing, don't keep grazing back and back and back on the same piece of pasture for days and weeks on end. Every time you graze, regraze something that's just been grazed and it's put up a tiny little shoot, that shoot is grown from the reserves within the root system. It's not really got enough photosynthetic solar panels to actually allow CO2 and the plant to photosynthesize. So you're depending on the root reserves and your soil nutrients more than you're depending on the free stuff, which is the sunlight and the CO2. So just be careful. Try not to keep grazing the same paddock down. Get the cows or sheep in and then try and get them out as quickly as possible. Now, I'm presuming last night, I couldn't see the seminar last night. I had a meeting, but I think you were covering a bit of nutrition. So I'll just touch on this really, really quickly. And if we miss stuff, you can ask questions at the end. That's totally fine. But we need to understand how the nutritional content of the pasture changes at different stages of growth. It's really important, as we can then determine whether the nutritional requirements of our pasture is adequate to meet the needs of our animals. Currently, the pastures in most of Victoria are dry unless you've got irrigation, and the grass is stalky if there is grass. I sent off some feed tests last week and just got them back, and the ME, or metabolizable energy, was 8.8, and the digestibility was 60%. So if we were to run a line through, now I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but if we were to run a line through at 8.8, which is on the axis of the right-hand side, across the 60% on the left-hand side of digestibility, we could see that we're only just maintaining dry stock. So this farmer, where I took the pasture samples from, was actually running cows and calves on it. So the cows would be struggling to maintain condition because they're feeding their calves, and milk production would be dropping on this particular paddock, meaning the cows wouldn't be putting on as much weight as they could be. So there may be a need to supplement with some better quality feed, such as silage or some good quality legume hay, or if you're up north, even some good quality rye clover hay. You don't tend to get great quality rye clover hay in southern Victoria, unfortunately, unless you're a really good manager and get a bit lucky. So many farmers get really enthusiastic when they hear about a new product at a field day, or a salesperson makes some impressive claims when they knock at the farmer's door. I see too many farmers make risky decisions on new management practices and new products. And sometimes they get really poor results. Sometimes they get outstanding results. But if you're going to try something new, really monitor change so you know what you're dealing with, and don't bet your whole farm on it. So this could be as involved as setting up some replicated trials, which are in the top left-hand side there. These trials were actually testing different fertilizers. We ran those trials for over 7 years and got some really good data out of that, which helped a lot of farmers to actually make decisions based in the region on the results of that. So that was a really good outcome, but they take a bit more work. Or you could do some test strips in the paddock, the center photo, the middle photo. Now that's actually on a farm that we were leasing when I was farming, my brother and father. And yeah, we got the fertilizer guy to spread some nutrients on the paddock. Obviously the fertilizer worked really well, but the fertilizer spreader was a bit haphazard with setting up the machine. So we got some test strips, so we could see that we actually got a benefit. And they say that if you can actually see a change with your eye, just visually, you're looking at a minimum of 30% change in productivity. So we can see those darker or lighter greens, which is where the fertilizer went on. We can know that there'd be a minimum of 30%, possibly there 100% increase compared to where the fertilizer didn't go on. And there's also research that suggests the benefits to the animals outweigh the increases that you'll see visually in the pastures. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't forget to monitor under the soil as well. Hopefully you're increasing your earthworm population. Hopefully you're seeing improved aggregation or structure within your soil also. There's some really simple online tools available, including videos showing how to do visual soil assessment, and you can get recording sheets to record your results on it. It's really important to monitor when you make change, so you know if you're actually seeing some benefits or not. So we're briefly going to talk a little bit about trees. There's many reasons to plant trees, and a lot of the reasons will be unique to your situation. However, if we have livestock, then the provision of trees is fundamental for shade and shelter. We just should be doing that. But trees can provide many more benefits than just shade and shelter, and some of them are listed there. I've got a good mate. His name is Clinton, and Clinton is a farmer and a forest scientist. And Clinton is passionate about integrating trees to be productive and beneficial on farms. That's a picture of a section of his farm there. And you see that he's growing trees, and he's got cattle grazing under it, and he's got beautiful pasture under his trees as well. So Clinton was so passionate about this that we actually were able to set up a demonstration site on that farm, and we monitored it for probably about 7 or 8 or 9 years actually, and we monitored pasture productivity under the trees compared to outside of the trees. We measured tree growth. We looked at soil carbon levels. We looked at biology. Um, we looked at the value he was getting off the trees from firewood when he was thinning and so forth. And the results were really, really positive. And Clinton is actually now expanding what we learnt from this demonstration over the rest of his farm. So you can integrate trees and livestock and pastures and crops, but you need to be smart about how you do it. You probably need to get really good advice to make sure that you do it right, because there can be many pitfalls if you don't do it right. Even choosing trees that actually allow pasture to actually grow under them, choosing the right trees is important. Choosing a tree that doesn't have a bark that animals will rub or chew off is also important. So Clinton's actually been able to increase the value of his output per hectare on this particular block compared to the rest of his farm. So you can receive many benefits through planting trees. This is another farmer. This one's from Western Victoria, Andrew Stewart. Now, Andrew, I think he won the top Landcare gong for farmers quite a few years ago, actually, for the work that he has done with his farm and his family with trees and with sustainability, with agroforestry over many years. So he runs that with his wife and his daughters, and he's holding up a little picture, and that picture is a farm map. And well, it's not a farm map, it's a map or a photo of what is actually behind him where he's standing currently. And you can see that it was a bare piece of land with a dam in it that had been sprayed out. And it was a bit of a wetter, steeper area, not much use. So I thought what we could do about that. And they actually decided they would actually plant native and exotic flowers within that area, which was not part of their sheep grazing zone. So they fenced it off and planted proteas and banksias and callistemons and a whole range of different species. And they've actually been able to increase the the financial productivity of that particular piece of land, and also turn it into something that's really, really beautiful. And they've been able to sell those flowers at the farm gate and also at local cafes and B&Bs and so forth in the Otways where they live. And actually, if you're going to, there's actually a conference coming up in April called Grounded Conference, and there's farmers and speakers coming from all over the world speaking at that. And it's actually going to be hosted on Andrew and his family's farm. So, some of you may be interested in that. So after this seminar, look up Grounded Conference. It's excellent. So all farmers plant with good intentions, but sometimes we end up with a different outcome to what we'd hoped for. And the end result is that the trees fall on the fences. There's weeds and there's pests in there. It gets out of control. Snakes get in there, so it gets hard to manage. Trees get a bad name. Landcare, forestry companies, CMA, they all get blamed. But they're common stories that I hear a lot. And unfortunately, trees get a bad rap when in most cases the issue is caused by a lack of research or no management. Trees aren't set and forget. They're like any other crop on your farm or like livestock. They require management. So before you plant a tree, do your research and your management. So this includes weed control, pest animal control. When you plant, make sure that you have paths so you can actually get through there on your side-by-side or a vehicle, so you can actually manage blackberries or thistles or gorse or anything else that might come up in there. You might need to do some cool burns to keep it manageable, reduce the risk of a hot burn. You might need to or you will need to do pruning and thinning if you're wanting to harvest them for food or timber. So trees are an amazing resource on your farm. However, it's so important that you do your research before you plant a tree. So work out what your end goal is, whether it's biodiversity, shade, shelter, agroforestry, food, whatever it is, carbon, and do your research and work towards the end goal. Avoid the pitfalls that so many farmers have made. A free tree, so it's a free tree, is not necessarily the best option depending on your goals. Get involved in an agroforestry network. If you're in Western Victoria in the Otways, there's a fantastic one. There's another really good one, Gippsland Agroforestry Network in this area. I think there's another one up around Daylesford, Ballarat, Bendigo area as well. Do a master tree grower program, fantastic program. If you're solely interested in biodiversity, then land cares and CMAs may be able to help you with advice and sometimes with funding as well to help you on your journey. So we're going to jump into a little bit about prioritising infrastructure improvements and developments. These include things like fencing and water, shedding, laneways, livestock handling. When we purchase a new farm, there's usually lots of things we need to prioritise, but we need to determine what is a must-do over what is cool to have. Often, the cool to have takes priority over the must-dos. We think when we get a farm that we need a new side-by-side and a new tractor and all the toys, and sure, we probably do need a tractor and probably do need a side-by-side, but if your yards are not able to hold cattle and the cattle keep getting onto the road because the fences are stuffed, then we need to prioritise that over a toy, don't we? So it's also really, really important to plan for seasonal pressures. For example, if you have a really dry summer, or if you have a fire come through, how are we going to manage our stock if we keep them on a farm if the fences are gone? Have we got a secure livestock withholding area where we can actually feed them and keep them safe and secure while we wait for pastures to grow and fences to go back up? We also need to plan for wet winters. You know, if you're in a wet farm in South or West Gippsland or southern Western Victoria, or anywhere can get wet at different times, can't it? Then how are we going to manage that? You know, have we got good laneways so that we can actually get feed and tractors to the actual livestock so that we can feed them? Or are we going to have them in a stock containment area where they are fed in one contained area? It's really important to plan for these sort of things. They're all really costly. So that's why it's really, really important to prioritise. So farming's extremely rewarding, as many of you will know. However, farms can be greedy. They're greedy for capital and your time. So you need to be realistic about what your aims are. And everyone has different aims. It could be being profitable 4 years out of 5. It could be planting 3% of your farm to trees each year for shade and shelter. It might be replacing expensive imported inputs with lower cost, homemade or locally sourced inputs. It might be building a stockyard over the next year. It might be building a stock containment area in 2 years' time. It might be improving your laneways. You've got to prioritise that. And we need to do a stock take of what the current assets are and whether they're suitable for the enterprise. And we need to make that judgment call, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. What we think might be okay may not be okay in someone else's eyes and may not even meet legal requirements for a safe operating space or procedure. You know, these pictures here are classics, you know. Yeah, the old stockyards, you know, you see them I don't see many with cattle in it like that. And I would hope that you wouldn't, because you're not going to get an agent or a vet working in something like that, are you? They might come out, they won't come back. Is your loading race sitting on a 44-gallon drum? You know, there's a truck there backed up to it. This happens. As your shearing shed got holes in the floor, well, you're not going to get the shearers back. That you're probably not going to get them to last more than 10 minutes there, are they? So, we can laugh at these photos because they're classics, and they are, and they're probably the extreme end. But we all know that we need to provide a safe working environment for ourselves, for our family, for our staff, and our livestock, and that's a priority. So they're the things that we really need to focus on. Each farmer should create a plan with all the partners' inputs. Discuss your needs and your wants and your dreams and plans and write them down. Work together to achieve your aims and review them annually and update as required. And set short, medium, and long-term goals. Obviously, you can't do everything all at once. You won't have the capital usually. Tick them off when you achieve big things or even little things. Go to the local cafe or hotel with your family or with your staff and celebrate. Go away for the weekend, perhaps. It's really important. Set aims of where you'd like to be in 5 years' time, and then work towards that. And then you'll find you'll be able to tick things off and achieve things that you never thought were possible before. So we're going to cover off on what we do with our land. And this is particularly important for newer farmers. So do we self-manage our land? Or do we employ people, or do we gist it out or lease it? Do we run sheep or cattle or crops? Do you have shedders or shearers if you're running sheep? Or do you have fat lambs? Or do you have cattle? Do you want to go cattle? If you want to run breeders or bullocks or weaners or stores or heifers or steers, buying and selling? There's a whole range of different options that we can go through. And we need to base our decisions on what we can actually physically manage, what our capabilities are, whether we have staff that we can actually do it, or whether we can do it ourselves. What skills do we have? Do we have any skills, or do we need to call on an advisor or consultant, someone like that, to actually help us? Can our cattle yards, or can our yards actually handle cattle, or are they designed for sheep, or are they not suitable for anything? What is my growing season? And can I grow, feed, and fatten cattle or sheep 11 or 12 months of the year? If you can, fantastic. But if your season's only 6 months long, how are you going to manage that? Are you just going to run a lower intensity, or are you going to feed them? What's the access to markets? Is there somewhere where I can send cattle easily or sheep easily? If I'm more niche and got goats, where can I send them, or pigs? They're all things that you really need to consider when you're making these decisions. So there's many different scenarios you can do with your land. The choice you make needs to suit yours and your family's goals. So if you're self-managing and running the land, do you have the skills? Do you have the staff or people you can call on to assist? Can you afford to pay for staff or consultants to assist you? Do you have tractors and equipment, the basic stuff that you need to actually run a farm safely and successfully? What happens if you want to head north in the caravan for a month or two in the winter, or go away for a week over Easter or Christmas or any other time? Have you got someone that can actually look after your animals? Have you got the water infrastructure set up? so that you know if you're away, the animals are going to have water at all times. Um, have you got feed set up? Things like that. Or am I better off adjusting and managing someone else's stock on my land? Do I have the skills to do that? Can I ensure that the animals will actually meet the growth specifications? Because some of the adjustments you've got to put on certain amount, some of the adjustment agreements, I should say, have to put on certain amounts of weight per week or per day as an average to meet. Can I supplementary feed when pasture is not providing adequate requirements? Or am I better off just leasing my land and letting someone else run their own stock on my land? Can I cope with that? What happens when they don't apply fertilizer or cut the hay and send it off somewhere else and start mining nutrients off my farm? Are they replacing them with fertilizers? They're all things that you need to consider. And if you decide to involve others, then particularly with adjusting or leasing, then you should have a legal document drafted which stipulates everyone's involvement and conditions and requirements. That way, everyone is covered. And if you're not working with others, but you're working with staff, for example, well, obviously you have legal requirements there with things you have to do with staff in regards to providing a safe working environment, paying super and tax and all those sort of things as an employee. Finally, where do we go for support? We should never stop learning, and we can learn so much from others. Don't discount grey hair and dirty fingernails. Experience is really, really important. If you're a new farmer, don't think you know more about sustainable farming than someone who's been doing it for 50 years. Farmers generally love a chat, so take the time to get to know your neighbours. That's really important. Join a farmer discussion group. They're just fantastic sources of information, and you get the opportunity to go out to other farms, learn from each other, and when things get really tough, they'll be there for you and you'll be there for them. I run a number and we've had several fires go through and different people have been impacted from the group at the different fires that have gone through. And you know what happens? The group pulls together. They'll take some tractors out. They'll start rolling up fences that are burnt. They'll start stringing up wires. They'll chop down trees off fences. They'll help with providing some hay. They might even throw some cash. You know, it's really important to be networked in. And if you've got a good group, they're worth their weight in gold. It's fantastic. Get involved in the community. There's many free sources of advice, such as the VFF, land cares and CMAs. There's many good agronomists and advisors out there. Some are independent, some sell product. Don't discount someone because they're selling a product. You don't have to buy the product, but most agronomists and advisors are really knowledgeable and know their stuff and are there to help you. Sure, some may have sales targets, but you know, keep that in your mind, but don't discount them just because they're a sales agronomist. There's some excellent ones out there. There's a lot of really good industry groups as well. You're in East Gippsland Ag Group, Sensational Group, Southern Farming Systems, Birchip Cropping Group. If you're a cropper up in the western, up around Horsham area, Birchip area. There's many community groups, churches, sport clubs, CFA. Make sure you know your neighbours. They're the ones who will help you out generally when you get in a pickle. Livestock agents can be really good for you, sources of information, advice for you too, particularly when you're starting off and you know, you need to buy cattle in or sell cattle. They can provide a lot of advice of when the cattle are ready and things like that. Often they can source cattle for you. Make sure you get a good one. Talk to your neighbours about who the good ones are and it can be really rewarding to work with a really good one. There's a few resources that I will share with you when I share the slide pack with you. The top one is on regenerative agriculture. I helped create a series of 7 videos which are filmed in southern Victoria and Gippsland and the Morning Peninsula with soil scientist Declan McDonald, a terrific guy. And each video covers different principles of regenerative agriculture. They're all about 5 to 7 minutes. They're fantastic. So that link will take you to them. Soils for Life and soilquality.org.au have some really, really good resources around soils. Feeding Livestock has some great resources around pastures. Landcare Victoria and the agroforestry.org website has some really good information on trees and agroforestry. And then farmer discussion groups. So AgVic run better beef discussion groups. I facilitate a couple. I do one for beef in South Gippsland, and I do one for sheep in South Gippsland also. There's best wool, best lamb groups. They're spread all around Victoria. So if you go to the website, you can hook up. One's for the better beef, one's for the best wool, best lamb, and you can speak to a local coordinator. There's also privately run discussion groups that are run by consultants. There's discussion groups run by industry such as dairy, and there's probably other discussion groups as well. So yeah, I can't strongly encourage you enough to actually get involved in one. And if it doesn't fit you, that's fine. Try another one. Get involved with the industry groups, great sources of research. So Big No Till and VFF and so forth, they're fantastic too. Sources of information, Landcares and CMAs are also really good sources of information. Just Google them. You can find heaps of stuff. We're on to questions. So thank you for hosting me today or this evening, and I hope you got a bit out of it. Happy to be emailed or phoned or whatever if people have questions. But I'll stop sharing now, and then
Beautiful.
I think
Thanks for that, Peter. It was great. Awesome presentation. So we'll get into a few questions. We have one from here. So if you're continually understocked, is there any benefit to rotational grazing?
If you're continually understocked, my thinking would be, well, you would put a few more stock on. But if you're in a area where your season is short, for example, then you might want to stock fairly conservatively and have a bit of feed wedge built up in front of you, and then save it for the tougher times so you don't have to feed out the hay and silage so early, perhaps. But if you're of a lower input, lower intensity farm, look, you're just not going to get the same productivity as if you were to rotationally graze regularly, as if you were to set stock or keep the animals in the paddock for a couple of weeks at a time, sort of thing. It comes down to personal preference and how much you want to get out of your system, I guess, and I guess how much you want to put into the system as well. Remembering that every time you've got a green leaf growing, you're actually putting carbohydrates back into the system for the biology to work. So leaving things to just dry off and die doesn't necessarily help biology in the root systems. Cows will trample it down or provide a bit of fungi food and things like that. There's benefits for that, or keep the soil covered. There's just different ways of thinking about it, I guess. Yeah, it's not necessarily a wrong and a right answer, but if you want to increase your productivity, then yes, rotational grazing will certainly help with that.
All right, beautiful. We have a question here. So, what type of tree did Clinton plant on his farm, if you can remember?
So those I do remember where that picture of those cows were. There was spotted gum, silvertop ash, and silver wattle. And silver wattle is an interesting one because that's not a timber tree, but that was a legume tree. So that actually put nitrogen in the system and was actually a very fast growing tree, which actually forced the other trees to grow up quicker. So the silver wattles are all gone now. So what's left now is a combination of spotted gum and silvertop ash. However, that's what works well here at Bullen in West Gippsland, where Clinton is. If you're in the Mallee, for example, you won't be planting spotted gums and silvertop ash. You'll be looking for something that actually suits your environment up there.
Funny you should mention that. We actually have a question here about the Mallee. So, can farms in the Mallee with fast draining, sandy loam soils without irrigation be successful for regenerative farming?
Yeah, of course they can. Any farm can be successful regenerative farming. Yeah, it's tougher when you're on a drier soil. I'm seeing, yeah, everything is lower intensity. You know, if you got irrigation and high rainfall, you're going to grow a lot more grass than if you've got a 300 mil rainfall in the Mallee or a 200 or a 400, whatever, yeah, the season gives you. So if you're in that sort of situation, you're going to farm a bit differently. So your principles, keeping the soil covered, will be extremely critical because it's hot. You know, they're in the middle of 40s on 40s on 40s on 40s. You know, that's unthinkable down in Gippsland. You know, that's hot. So you're going to have to manage it a little bit differently. If you're going crops, well, you are tilling the soil, and you can do no-till, which is less impact on the soil and controlled traffic and things like that. There's a whole range of different things, which even though you're tilling, I would still call that regenerative because you're actually, you know, you could potentially be actually building your soil. Certainly, you're doing better than if you're cultivating the whole lot up and turning it up and turning it upside down. So, um, yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered your question specifically. You know, whether I'm not sure if you're a cropper or a grazier in the Mallee or a vineyard or something like that. But yeah, there's many ways of doing it. You got to suit or choose your principle or choose your practices based on those principles, which will actually work for you. And you've got to find them out yourself. And that's why you just do small things. Don't gamble the whole lot on it. Um, you know, nutrients in those sandy soils are going to leach a lot more readily than what they are going to leach on a heavy clay soil. So, you know, things like potassium and nitrogen, they'll leach. Sulfur will leach pretty rapidly in those soils. So, you know, you might be better off looking at foliar applications and things like that in that sort of situation to, you know, feed the plant, which then will feed the soil, rather than putting water soluble fertilizers potentially on that sandy country. You know, you just got to be careful. You got to work out what actually works best for your situation.
We only have a couple more questions, so make sure you send them in if you want Peter to answer them. He's more than happy to. We have are there pasture species that respond particularly well to rest and recovery systems in Victoria?
Yeah, so ryegrass, phalaris, cocksfoot, um, fescue, some of the key ones, um, all respond well. Even your native ones, you know, your wallaby grasses and your kangaroo grasses, things on those western plains and the more unimproved areas, that they will respond as well. You know, like they will respond well to a graze and then getting off them and letting them recover than if you were to just continually graze them, sort of thing. So most species actually do like to actually um, grow up and then graze and then recover, sort of thing. If you go too hard, you'll just end up with things like cooch and yeah, the bent grass, low productivity species that won't provide the nutrients for the most part the animals need.
All right. We got a question about measuring the soil. So, is there any simple or low way costs to monitor the below the ground changes without having the soil test every year?
Yeah, yep, there is. So, yep, just bear with me. I'll just get something.
Yeah, no worries.
There's different ways you can do it. You can there's there's what you call a visual soil assessment. You can Google that, and you can actually get a whole heap of parameters that you go through, and there might be 15 to 20 parameters listed on the sheet, and you might dig a hole and you might measure the root depth. You might count the number of worms. You look for dung beetle activity. You look at the color of the soil. You measure the topsoil. It's a whole range of simple visual indicators. You can do water infiltration where you have rings. I haven't got one with me, but truck exhaust pipe tube. It's about 4 inches round, stainless steel. Have it, cut 100 mils of that off, bevel the bottom edge, bang it into the ground, and if you tip 300 mils of water on, that's the equivalent of 1 inch of rainfall, and then time how long it actually takes to go into the soil. So the quicker it goes in, the more the soil is aggregated and able to breathe. So that's a good indicator of biology. But do several tests, don't just do one, because water infiltration is notoriously, what might take 10 seconds in one spot, 30 centimeters away, it might take a minute or 2 minutes. So you need to have a few of them to actually get an average sort of thing. There's a little simple tool that I use to measure biological activity. It's called the microbiometer. That's the little test thing. What you do is you actually get some samples of soil, and you get them a little bit dry. Then you filter them through a little, like it's a little tea thing, like the tea leaves go in. You shake it out. You put a millimeter of soil. You got a little syringe there. You put a mill of soil of the fine stuff into that. You put it into a little test tube, little plastic test tube, and then you have a reactive agent that you put in there with the water. You mix it. There's a little mixer here. It spins around and mixes it all up. You mix it for 30 seconds. You leave it for 20 minutes. And then you get a little pipette, and then you put 3 drops onto this little bit of paint card. You put 3 drops on, and then you get an app on your phone, the microbiometer app. Take a picture, and it gives you the actual fungal bacteria ratio and the microbial mass. So that's something I've used for quite a number of years, and it actually correlates pretty well with some of the lab tests, particularly the fungi bacteria ratio. The numbers don't correlate with the numbers you get from a lab. However, because there's different methodologies. However, I like using it to compare between different treatments, for example. So for different fertilizers or different management on the same farm on the same day or in the same paddock sort of thing. It's really good for doing test strips, because we're seeing differences between them on this thing. So it's I think the kit might be 300 maybe, and you might get 10 test kits, and you can get it you can Google it, but the Meter Man at Toowoomba sells it. I think there's a few others sell it now in Australia too. I tend to get the replacement kits direct from America. It's cheaper that way. I tend to buy them when there's Black Friday sales and whatever, and it works out about $7 US for each test that I do. So it's reasonably cheap, and it's one good way of measuring what's happening under the ground. But as part of your toolkit of things you're measuring. Measuring, you know, the penetrometer. I don't worry about the dials on top. I don't think I've done quite a lot of replicated trials. I can't see that there's no difference in the trials I've done to measure between treatments with a penetrometer. However, the penetrometer is really good for determining what the impediments are further down in your soil profile. So if you've got a blockage, if it really hits something hard at 20 centimeters, for example, you've got an issue there. So dig down to 20 centimeters with your shovel, have a look what it is. Is it a sodic soil? If it's sodic, you got some potential issues. You might be needing to get some gypsum onto it or something like that. But there's a whole range of different tools you can use. And I don't use a penetrometer. I use actually a bit of fencing wire, actually. I find that better because when it starts to bend, it gets too hard, sort of thing. So, yeah, I just use cheap stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, that's awesome. Very comprehensive answer. Thanks for getting that out. That's awesome.
Mm.
We have a bit of a long one here, so multiple parts as well. So if you have been fire affected, should you just wait and see how the pasture recovers, or is there things you should do early to improve the situation? Maybe just do that part first because there's a few more questions in there as well.
Yeah. It depends how hot it burns. So, pastures will recover over time, but if it's a really hot burn, it's going to be tougher and there might need to be some direct drilling. I wouldn't, my personal view is that I wouldn't go in with Roterra, cultivate it all up, anything like that, because there is no competition there at the moment because it's all been burnt. So you could direct drill in. The risk is when it's going to rain, because if you put it in now, is the seed going to last until insects or birds, depending on what you're planting, going to take it before the rain comes? It's probably a little early, to tell you the truth. Um, if you've got high root mat soils and peaty, those fires can actually burn for a long time underground and they're really, really hot. And we saw them in parts of West Gippsland after Black Saturday, particularly around Labatouche. And they were driving trucks over there, just dumping thousands and thousands of litres onto this peaty soil with the root mat. And it was making holes like down a few inches deep. It was just burning the roots all the way down into the soil. So if you're in that situation, yeah, you will have to do some pasture recovery, definitely. If it's just a cool burn, it'll probably come back pretty good, but it might give you the opportunity to actually, if you can afford it, because there's plenty of other expenses when you've been burnt, to add a little bit of diversity. Maybe you might want to put some newer species in, cheaper species of, depending where you are, ryegrass or cocksfoot or clovers or lucerne or something like that.
All right, that's awesome. There's two more parts of that. So, how long would you wait before you do a soil test after the fire? And what things would you do to prevent the erosion and contamination of dams post the fires, if you can do anything?
Yeah, really great questions. So, the what you can do to prevent contamination of water, for example, it's going to be a tough one. There's going to be a lot with the fires. I've done some soil tests after fires, and the soils will be higher in potash because grass is very high in potassium. Like there's probably 3 to 5% of the pasture is actually potassium. So you will get a bit of a potassium boost, providing it doesn't wash off or blow off. You'll have a bit of potassium laying on the surface there. It's hard to keep it there, particularly if it gets hot and windy. As far as dams go, you could potentially lay some. If you got a bit of a slope feeding into dams, you could lay some small square bales down, sort of thing, perhaps, to try and trap some of that sediment from entering the dam. The dams are going to get generally pretty dirty and messy. It's not nice. Yeah, so try and do what you can. You could potentially, yeah, I'd be going with the hay bales. Some people try shade cloth as well. You could potentially put some shade cloth down, some hay bales on top, and then some steel droppers behind them to actually stop the bales getting washed down because the bales will float if you get a bit of force of water behind them. Um, what was the first bit of the question again?
How long would you wait before you do a soil test?
Soil test. Yeah, I wouldn't do a soil test like while there's ash laying on the surface, because it's going to give you a higher potassium reading than what you would otherwise have, sort of thing. So I'd wait till it's growing again and the ash is off the surface. So might be a couple of months.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, we might finish off with a bit of planning in the future. So are there any practices currently considered alternative that you expect will become more mainstream in the future in the regen space?
That's an interesting one. I've um, I've just been um, last year. I won an award for work I did in land care in sustainable ag over many years, and the award was for a study tour. And I actually didn't want to go to a conference. I actually said that I'd really like to spend some time visiting a range of farms who are making and using bioferts on their properties. And I visited 8 farms right around Victoria who were the early adopters and innovators in the use of bioferts on their farms. And I've just been writing up the report the last few days, actually, and so it's all fresh in my mind. I think I think there's a bit in it that we can just keep in the back of the mind and do a bit of research on. Um, I'm involved in a couple of demonstration sites where we're actually measuring and comparing bioferts against conventional fertilizers, and results on the results. We've got a dairy, we've got a horticulture, and we've got beef farms involved. And the horticulture one's been using it a long time, over a decade, but we just set up and we've got some new ground that's just been broken. So we're actually just trialing that. So we've got no info on that as yet. In the dairy, we've been monitoring that for close on a year. We're also we're not just using total biological, we're actually melting some urea, putting some melted boron, humic acid, things like that in with the bioferts. And we're comparing that with conventional urea, following cows around and 3-in-1 and things like that. We're actually getting very, very comparable results at a cheaper cost. So there's some benefits there in potentially we can reduce costs, we can maintain productivity, and we can reduce our reliance on imported fertilizers, which come from the Middle East and other countries. So there's potential for opportunities there, I believe. Most of the 8 farmers are not solely 100% bioferts. Some are actually using some conventional granulated, but they've really reduced the amounts that they're actually using, and they're targeting it more towards, calcium and phosphorus, things that are a bit hard to get on as a foliar type spray. So I think that in that space, that's an exciting area. I'm excited about that, and seeing some really good results. So that's one area. That's the first one that comes to mind.
All right. Well, I think we might nearly wrap it up there. So I'd like to thank you, Peter. That was an awesome presentation and all those answers. I hope everyone got something out of it and you might be able to apply it to your farm in the future. So yeah, that'll conclude our last webinar and part of the series. So thanks everyone for attending and yeah, thank you, Peter, once again. It was awesome.
Pleasure. Yeah, I hope everyone got something out of it useful.
All right, beautiful. Well, thanks everyone.